Boy meets girl. Boy stalks girl. Boy doesn't deserve girl. Boy is kind of a jerk. Boy fights evil exes. On this Valentine's episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today is my forever Valentine, Bethany Wells. How are you, Bethany?
I'm just fine. How are you?
Oh, I'm wonderful. It is our Valentine's Day episode, although this is airing the day after. But if you did follow us last week, Bethany and I did decide upon watching Scott Pilgrim based off of what we deemed was the best movie to watch for a date.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did that thing.
We'll go ahead and spoil the reveal a little bit. It didn't quite pan out as well as I think especially Bethany's mind originally was as to what Scott Pilgrim was really about.
It doesn't hold up, you guys. Y'all aren't gonna... If you're a big fan of this movie, if you're a big fan of the comic book, just, you're not gonna like me in this episode, and that's okay. I've been disliked for more things.
All right, well, we'll, of course, break into it a little bit later, but let's get into it. So Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was released on August 13th, back in 2010. It was directed by Edgar Wright, who I am a big fan of. He's the director of the Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End movies. He also helped to write Ant-Man.
Which is probably, heads up, if you still have time, could be a much better Valentine's Day movie. If you still have time. Run. Don't walk. Run.
And of course, he also did Baby Driver, and I'm a big fan of Edgar Wright. Yeah. This wasn't a huge box office hit, but it has become kind of a cult favorite and one that a lot of people, I think, eventually appreciated for its style and what it was. Although, again, story's not great.
Nope.
But the story does come from a 6-issue comic series written and illustrated by Brian Lee O'Malley. It is a standalone series, doesn't connect to any type of bigger universe or whatnot. It's kind of like the Harry Potter of comic books. There's 6 volumes, and each volume is a different battle with the X's. As he battles each X, it's a whole different story, and each one of these comics is like 200 pages. So they really are graphic novels and full volumes one by one. The movie actually began production after just the success of the first comic, the volume 1, which is called Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, which explains, and we'll get into this a little bit more, why it's the comic that is most carried out in the movie. The others kind of get shortened a little bit, and then he wasn't even finished with volume 6 by the time the movie was finished. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in the moving panels. But he was kind of helping with the screenplay while writing the volumes, while the movie was being made. Kind of all a hodgepodge of creation there. Kind
of like you said with Harry Potter, the first few movies came out before the final books had been released.
Yeah, it seems to be a trend there with Hollywood, because they did the same thing with Game of Thrones.
They see money. Yeah. They see money, and they got to grab it before it gets away.
Yeah, because I know with Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin couldn't even keep up.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a big gap between Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. Like, there were several years gap, and part of that was she kind of hit a writer's block of like, oh gosh, there's too much pressure.
So let's go ahead and get into the characters, which is really the foundation of this story, especially in the comics. There's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to the movie versus the comic here, when it comes to the characters. Even the comic book itself has inconsistencies. So their heights, their hair colors, it varies. The comic was originally entirely in black and white. And so things like Ramona's hair changing color was actually a joke because it was in black and white. Uh-huh. But then also, he didn't really know what they would look like in color. They later released a color version, and O'Malley pretty much said that he just based it off of whatever kind of seemed like it was going to fit.
Yeah.
He didn't really have an idea. He more cared about the story than he cared about what they looked like.
Yeah. Well, then, sir, you could just write a book, sir.
So, well, I will say this, though. The casting is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
To the comic books. Although the comic books do feature kind of a manga anime type style, the people they cast, the costumes, the haircuts and all, it all matches up pretty well. And of course, we got to start off with Scott Pilgrim himself, played by Michael Cera. In the comics, Scott is 23, 24, because the comic actually takes place over a year. So he's 23, 24, even though for some reason they make him 22.
I guess to make it, I think they did they did not know what to do when it came to Scott dating Knives. And it was almost like they wanted to present it as, this is weird, right? But hey, we don't want him to seem too weird or nobody's going to like him.
So one year younger.
But it is weird. But don't make it too weird because we do want people. And so it was like there was this, because that's how it opens, is like Scott Pilgrim is dating a high school girl. One, gross. That's gross. The only people allowed to date high school people are other people in high school. Yeah, I said it.
Yeah, because we'll get into Knives a little bit more, but of course Knives is supposed to be 17. Mm-hmm. And it like their age is too big of a gap to even say she was a freshman when he was a senior in high school.
It's just creepy.
So, but again, he's 22 in the movie, which is actually what Michael Cera's age was at the time. So, again, I don't know what the year difference really was.
Well, let me start it off by saying I have loved Michael Cera for many years. He, as just a being, brings me much joy. This movie, watching it now, and I think that's part of the reason why I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, was I love him. And honestly, a lot of the actors in the movie love him. They're great.
This was a lot of theirs, like early first, if not, they were early all and breakout type film.
They were like indie darlings, all of them. Well, Scott Pilgrim is a jerk, and he's an idiot. And I don't understand why anybody wants to date him, much less Ramona. And I don't know why anyone would want to fight over him. I don't know why anyone would stick up for him. He's an idiot. Like, none of him makes sense, other than, like, this is our hero.
Yeah.
Ain't he cute?
And that's where a lot of the discrepancies between the comic and the movie play in. O'Malley does try. I'm not going to say he's really successful at it. It kind of gets convoluted. But he does try to explain that there's a reason why Scott is always forgetting things and always not realizing what's going on. Yeah. Which, again, we'll get into with the moving panels. But back to the character. The name Scott Pilgrim is actually from a song. It's from a Canadian band called Plumtree. And the song is actually in the movie. Even though the song came out first, and the song, of course, is called Scott Pilgrim. But that is where O'Malley got the name. He actually got a lot of his names from other things, and we'll get into that a little bit more. As much as Bethany dislikes the character of Scott, Scott Pilgrim is actually, as a character, and this is the comic character, was actually ranked among the top 100 greatest comic book characters of all time.
Get better idols.
He's been known as one of the most authentic 20-somethings ever committed to comic book paper.
Okay, you know what? I take that back. That's not a lie. 20-somethings, though, suck. So there we go. It is very authentic and real. Okay, to back up what I'm saying with facts. He's just really awkward and weird on his date with Ramona.
But aren't we all, especially in our early 20s?
Yes, but
like, we haven't figured everything out yet.
You can be awkward and weird without being, like, borderline creepy. I'm sorry, but there have been too many times where women are just expected to go like, oh, well, he's a sweet old man. Oh, he's a he's just a quirky dude, and I'm just not a fan. Not a fan of him. He's mean to Knives. He's on that first date with Ramona while he's still technically in a relationship with Knives, who's in high school. And the movie can't make up its mind whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I also find that a problem.
All right, well, let's continue on with our characters. Of course, Scott being our main male character, and then the main love interest, as far as we are supposed to believe, is Ramona Flowers, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. In the comics, she is 24, and again, they have a little bit of an age gap here. Mary Elizabeth Winstead was 25 when they filmed it. Now, I don't think they actually say her age in the movie.
I don't think so.
So I don't know. But like I said, in the comics, she's supposed to be 24. She is literally the girl of Scott's dreams.
She falls into this really weird trope. And it's funny because I knew about the trope watching the movie. I wanted to do some research on it when I was preparing to speak. And it's called the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope. And when I'm looking this trope up, it's funny because her picture pops right up. And let me look really quick so that I can get the perfect definition of Manic Pixie Dream Girl for you. Are you familiar with this stock character type?
I am not.
Okay. So it was a term coined by Nathan Rabin after watching Elizabethtown with Kirsten Dunst. So if that gives you any idea.
It does not, because I never saw Elizabethtown.
Well, that's fine too. A manic pixie dream girl exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures.
Okay.
She has no personality other than she's quirky.
Okay, now I will get into that a little bit. So the movie version is a lot kind of more stoic and really colder than she is in the comics. In the comics, she's cynical, but in the comics, she has more fun, she's more lively, she smiles, she laughs. In the comics, you can tell she's into Scott. I never got that out of the movie.
No.
In the movie, I couldn't tell that she actually liked Scott.
No.
But in the comic book, that does come across a little bit more. Now, that could be because of what was originally meant to be the ending, which we'll get into later. But there is a big difference here. Now, I will say, Mary Elizabeth Winstead has gone on record to say that she absolutely enjoyed playing Ramona. But I think it was more because of the choreography and fight training she got to do.
It would be a fun movie to perform in, just for that reason alone. It's kind of over the top, and then you get to do all this mixture of acting. Another trope that Ramona falls into that's really toxic is she's one of those not like the other girls. She's a cool girl. She's like one of the boys. She's not like the other girl. And the reason that's problematic is it's saying girls are like this, and that's bad. If you want to be good, you have to be more like a boy. And while they never explicitly say Ramona is not like the other girls or one of the boys, it's very heavy-handed, especially when they even just sit Knives next to Ramona. Knives is so excited. I mean, that's how I would be if you were when you perform on stage. I'm excited to see you. I'm really excited to be there. I'm your biggest fan.
You've never passed out, though.
No, well, not that you know of. But anyways, it's one of those things where she's too cool to be like a regular girl, which then implies regular girls, whatever that means, is bad.
Yeah, and like I said, that's a completely different characteristic in the movie than it is from the comic.
Mm-hmm. That was really, and there's a couple of tests, feminism tests, that I played with this movie. The first one is the most obvious, and it's the weakest, but it's the most well-known, and it's the Bechdel test. I don't know if I've talked about it on this podcast, but it was started in a comic book or a graphic novel written by Alison Bechdel. It's when two women who are both named talk to each other from more than 2 lines of dialogue about something other than a man. Are you familiar?
Yes.
Why are you familiar?
We talked about it. You talk about it all the time, but we did talk about it in our Smallville episode.
Okay. So anyway, technically this movie passes the Bechdel test. And it's between Ramona and Knives. And it's when... Okay, Ramona and Knives are in the bathroom at the 1 hour mark. But it's a stretch to really call it a conversation, as it's 3 lines. And while Scott is certainly the subtext, he's never brought up. The gesture is also more concerning Knives' newly dyed hair. So it's a weak pass of the Bechdel test, but the bar for the Bechdel test is so low, it's trouble. The next, it's a less well-known. It was just started in 2013 because of the movie Pacific Rim, and it's called the Mako Mori test. And it's a measure of the level of gender equality within a film. The requirements of the Mako Mori test are that a film or television show has at least one female character, and that this character has an independent plot arc, that the character or her arc does not simply exist to support a male character's plot arc. This movie does not pass the Mako Mori test.
The movie, no. I will say the comic book does.
Okay.
The comic book for both.
Okay.
The comic book's a lot stronger with the Bechdel test and then how you pronounce that other one you just said. Because there is, and again, we'll get into more of this with moving panels, there is a lot more of the relationship between the female characters, primarily between Ramona and Kim.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That would be much more interesting to watch.
But again, we'll get into that with the moving panels. Moving on with our characters, probably one of the, I just find one of the more fun characters, and that's Wallace Wells, no relation, played by Kieran Culkin, brother of Macaulay. He is 25 in the comics. Culkin was actually 28 when they were filming the movie. In both, he is Scott's roommate. But in the comic books, he also serves as kind of like Scott's mentor for the fights, kind of, helping him know what to do, or, kind of being his coach and pepping him up and helping him prepare for the fights. You kind of see that in the first couple of fights, but then that kind of disappears in the movie. Again, that probably goes along with what we talked about earlier of the volumes coming out at the same time they're writing the screenplay. And so a lot of that got lost in the translation.
Right. I'm not going to lie. I enjoyed this character. He's probably the funniest of all the characters. I guess my big issue with him is his character doesn't hold up in modern ways. He's quote unquote gay, and that's his only personality trait. Like, you don't know much else about him other than he's gay
and sarcastic
and Scott's roommate, and they share a bed.
So we've already mentioned her before, but let's talk about Knives Chow, played by Ellen Wong. Again, the character is supposed to be 17. Wong was actually 25.
Oh.
Which makes her older than Scott, technically.
Good for her.
As far as acting goes. Again, she has a deeper arc in the comic, as I was just talking about. But I do feel like her character, and again, more in the comics than really the movie lays out, her character is supposed to be the first timer. This is her first love. Her and Scott, when they kiss, that's her first kiss. This is her first breakup, and it's how someone who's experiencing their first reacts to that stuff.
And that makes sense. And I kind of hate, they do her dirty in this movie. They kind of play her off as just this, I hate this word, but hysterical character, and everything is so, but she's 17. Like, 95% of 17-year-olds are are that excited and emotional and dramatic and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's why you don't date 22-year-olds when you're 17.
Well, that among legal reasons.
Exactly, Scott Pilgrim.
All right, moving on.
Scott Pilgrim versus the legal justice system.
Moving on, let's talk about the band. Frontman for the band, Stephen Stills. Name actually came from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Was the name of the Stills in that band. He's played by Mark Webber. The character is supposed to be 23. Webber was actually 30.
Woo! Shout out to 30-year-olds.
I don't know. I mean, he looked the part, though. He had the look, same as the character. The character, of course, is very neurotic. He dates Julie, which is Aubrey Plaza's character. We'll get to in a minute.
Oh, I did not really pick up on that in the movie.
But yeah, so in the comics, they're on and off. Yeah, I don't know if that's really clear in the movie that they dated, but they date on and off in the comics until it eventually is revealed that Stevens decides to come out of the closet. And he does it to Scott in the last volume, and the comic is very meta. Like, it's aware that it's in a comic book. And so he says, "You were too busy, so I told everybody else back in," I think he says volume 5. But yeah, so yeah, and now Mark Webber and Michael Cera both actually play their instruments.
Oh, that is really cool.
I think Michael Cera actually already knew how to play a bass and could already play bass. Because from what I've heard is Michael Cera actually had to dumb down his ability because their band's not supposed to be good. Mm-hmm. But whereas Webber actually learned to play guitar so he could do this movie. And not a lot, but the singing that Sex Bob-omb does, that is actually Mark Webber singing. Also,
side note, Sex Bob-omb, great band name.
Which actually comes from video games. So the video game tie-in that has this, Bob-omb is the name of the bomb from the Super Mario
Cute.
Games and all. So we do have that tie-in. The drummer is Kim Pine, played by Allison Pill.
Another woman done dirty by this movie.
Well, definitely. Character's 23. Allison Pill was 25 at the time. Kim is nothing in this movie. But she is almost the third main character in the comics.
And that's a shame because, they kind of, they hint at the past between Scott and Kim, but they never actually get to the heart of what happens. I think there's one moment towards the end where he apologizes to her. Mm-hmm. But I would love to know more about Kim. I mean, I know this movie can't be 3 hours long. I get that, but, they do her a disservice by, building up this backstory with no payoff.
Yeah, and the comic goes deep into it. We do learn about Kim and Scott's relationship and how Kim pretty much is Scott's first girlfriend, and then she develops kind of a good, deep friendship with Ramona, and yeah, the movie hints at it a little bit that she actually cares more than she's letting on, but it's a lot more apparent in the comic book that she actually does care. And like I said, we'll get into a lot more of that. It's hard to talk about the characters without going ahead and discussing the way the comic is portrayed in the movie, because the comic is so based off of the life of these characters.
Right.
And of course, I guess you'd say member of the band, although he first off starts more like a roadie, and that is young Neil, who also, again, musical reference, you flip his name around, it's Neil Young.
Clever.
Yeah, he is played by Johnny Simmons. I didn't get ages for this one. I don't know if they reveal his age in the movie like they do some of the other ones. My thing about young Neil is that other than he later dating Knives, I didn't really see a purpose for his character in the movie or honestly in the comic books.
Yeah, I guess he does get, his only purpose is that one little spot where he dates Knives for like a second and then he's out.
Yeah, but he really is kind of a background character.
He's also, he kind of is that conduit person where when the band is practicing and the girlfriend, whoever it is sitting on the couch, she has someone to talk to.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, another purpose for him, so that they can have dialogue while the band is playing.
I do want to hit 3 other minor characters, although one of them's a lot bigger in the comics, because we talked about earlier how these were kind of some breakout roles, especially for some young Hollywood starlets who would go on to much bigger and better things, including Oscars.
Yeah.
And that, of course, starts off with Brie Larson's portrayal of Envy Adams. This is actually a pretty good performance for such a small part. Brie, just like I mentioned earlier with Mark Webber for Stephen Stills singing, Brie actually did her own singing for the one performance you see of their band. But the character of Envy Adams is supposed to be Scott's big ex-girlfriend right before Knives and Ramona. They go into a lot more depth with this character. The character actually hangs around all the way to the end in the comics, and they just do a lot more with Envy in the comics. But for a small little bit part, you would almost say, because she only pops up in the one moment after Scott defeats that third Evil X. You don't really see Brie Larson as Envy anymore. But nice breakout role, if you want to call it that, for Brie Larson, who would later go on to win an Oscar.
Had she already started doing United States of Terror at that point?
No idea.
I loved United States of Terror, and she was the daughter of Terra. And she's just an incredible actress. Hot take, everybody. Brie Larson, good at her job.
Another actress who would go on to be nominated for an Oscar, Anna Kendrick, plays Scott's sister Stacy Pilgrim in this. The character's supposed to be 18. Anna Kendrick was 25 at the time. It is supposed to be Scott's younger sister. I don't think they really relay whether she's supposed to be older or younger.
I think they do say at some point in passing that she's younger.
Yeah, it might be in the little pop-up because they seem to do for every character. Now,
Kendrick.
O'Malley actually based the character off of his real sister.
Oh, that's neat.
Although he later kind of regretted it. As the volumes continue, there's less and less Stacy.
Why did he regret it? Did he say?
I think he just thought that it was too harsh of a statement, and then he also didn't want people to make the connection, I think, is what it was. So
if I were to write a book about and have a character in it called Schmeramy Vels, and then everything he did was like Superman and do a podcast about movies that are based on comic books, then eventually I would start to regret that, is what you're saying?
Probably.
All right, time to call my editor.
All right. And then finally, Julie Powers, kind of I don't really know what her character kind of was. Even though her character is from the comics, I think there are several characters in the comics that they kind of mashed together to make what Julie is in the movie, played by Aubrey Plaza. This is, of course, right before Parks and Rec, and when she would really kind of take off.
Love her.
The character is supposed to be 22. I just stuck with the ages for a lot of these characters when I could find them. The character is 22. Aubrey Plaza was actually 26 at the time, so a little bit older. But, she kind of plays the character, kind of comes in and sticks her nose in, always irritating Scott at just the right moment.
My favorite with her was whenever she would curse and the little thing would pop up over her mouth. And how are you making your mouth do that? I mean, it's a very harsh critique that I have for this movie, but there are parts in it that are just really funny and enjoyable, but just do better. Just do better movies, please.
All right, let's get into the moving panels. As we talked about earlier, Scott Pilgrim is a 6-part series of comics that was released between August of 2004 through July of 2010. And then remember, this movie came out in August of 2010. So again, that last volume and the movie were right behind each other. The look and the style of the movie matches the comic. A lot of the jokes, a lot of the dialogue, straight from the comics. While we were watching it, I actually pulled up some of the pages from that first volume and was showing them to Bethany, just showing her. It's shot for shot in that first volume. Now, the ending, as we'll talk about a little bit more because I'm going to break it down volume by volume. The ending is different because, like I said, volume 6 was written while / after the screenplay was finished. So O'Malley got his ideas for volume 6 more from the screenplay than the screenplay got the ideas from his comic in terms of that one. Another major difference is the entire series takes place over a year, probably a little over a year.
This feels like it happens in like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. So the events of the movie, it only is about a week.
Yeah.
And so we're going to break it down volume by volume, kind of give you highlights as to how the movie compared with the comics. And so volume number 1 of Scott Pilgrim, honestly, this is the first 30 minutes of the movie. Like almost word for word, shot for shot. So volume 1, I think I mentioned earlier, is called Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life. And this is all of the same stuff. We get introduced to the band the same way. Even the shot of when they go to his house, his apartment, whatever you want to call it, and they label everything, explaining what's Wallace's and what's his. That's shot for shot, straight out of this. This is the movie. The comic book is turned into the first 30 minutes, leading all the way up, of course, to the Evil X number 1 with Matthew Patel. And the fight is even almost exactly the same, with the exact same shots, the way that he hits them, and it's the pow or the boom or the bang, and all of that is almost exactly shot for shot. And honestly, it's the best part of the movie, the first 30 minutes.
It really is. Then it kind of starts feeling rushed and confusing, and all the stuff that they were building up to, they're just like, we're not going to do any more character development. We're not going to do any of that. What you know about these characters is what you know now.
Yeah, because all of the thing about Scott getting the computer and getting the emails from Patel and just kind of ignoring them, that's in the comic. The whole bit about ordering something from Amazon just to have her deliver it, and then he throws it away. That's and it's all of these great moments that it's a lot of the moments you really do remember, I think, out of the movie.
Yeah.
Is the ones that are straight out of the comics.
Yeah, I mean, in true Bethany fashion, I have not read the comics, but I was looking at the things that you would show me, and yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, and then it takes a hard turn. Volume 2, which was titled, is the one that's actually titled Scott Pilgrim versus the World. We do get some moments out of that. The whole thing about his hair and needing a haircut, and all of a sudden puts on the hat.
Do they explain that more in the comics than in the movie?
They do not.
Other than like he gets a haircut and then Envy breaks up with him.
Yeah, no, they don't. The haircut thing.
I mean, it's just a funny little bit.
Yeah, it just plays off of I think Scott's own like self confidence and all of that. Honestly, in terms of the comics, Scott Pilgrim versus the World was one of the more, I'm not going to say most boring, but it was a little bit more boring. I don't know if it was because...
It took you the longest to read.
Yeah. Volume 1, I think, it gets going and whatnot. Volume 2 just kind of slowed down. And I do think, I think it was the one that took me the longest to get through. And there's not a lot of connection. There really isn't. Mm-hmm. They do get into the fight. Of course... Evil X number 2 is Lucas Lee, played brilliantly in the movie by Chris Evans. I love that it's... I wouldn't say it's him parodying himself, because I don't think he had reached that yet in the movies.
He was parodying what he would become.
Yeah. But of course, the fight is different. The location's kind of the same. He's filming the movie, but there's no team of stunt doubles that Scott has to fight off. They do the one punch that sends Scott, way up into the air, or the spinning throw, I should say.
I did kind of like the stunt double bit, though. I thought that was a kind of funny.
Yeah, it worked for the movie.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have worked in a comic book like layout, in a graphic novel layout, where how am I supposed to know that these 7 dudes aren't the same dude?
Yeah, well, they actually threw in something. It wasn't with stunt doubles. It was a group of girls. I don't know it entirely, but they did something similar in a one shot that they did to help promote the movie that came out on Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah. And
they did have a moment where Scott fought a group of, I believe it's girls. So it's very similar to the scene that happens in the movie, but it does work. The movie, though, goes pretty much straight into that fight, and then the rail and all. The comic book, for some odd reason, they just sit down and start talking. And again, it just... To me, it just kind of slowed everything down. And
well, I will say of all the X's, that one, even though Chris Evans is hilarious, it's not really the most interesting of all the X's. Honestly, I'd forgotten he was in it.
Well, yeah, even the first couple of X's, Patel and Lucas Lee, Ramona even says with both of them, was like, well, one of them I kissed at camp, and the other one's like, yeah, we went out for like a week in middle school. Like, they're not even really, quote-unquote, X's, you know? They just really just kind of fit because you need 7 of them.
Yeah.
Moving on into Volume 3, which is titled Scott Pilgrim and the Infinite Sadness. This is where we get the story of Scott and Envy. Mm-hmm. And this is where they do a lot of the background stuff. There's also even a fight between Ramona and Envy, which the movie kind of replaced with Ramona and Roxy. So that same fight that Ramona and Roxy have is kind of what Ramona and Envy have, including Ramona having her giant hammer that she pulls out of her purse, and even ending with the touching on the back of the knee. And Scott is the one who knew about it because Scott was Envy's ex. And so Scott knew that touching Envy on the back of the knee would, stop the fight for the reasons that it does. Whereas in the movie, it's Ramona telling Scott to do it to Roxy.
Right.
But
I have a quick sidebar question. Is it ever revealed that, like, in a past life, Ramona was evil?
No. Talking about in the comics?
Yeah.
No. Like I said, in the comics, Ramona is much better of a character.
Because, I mean, in the movie, it maybe kind of hints at the idea of once upon a time she used to be evil, and that's why she has these evil exes.
Well, there's not that. There is... Now, you are meaning Ramona, right?
Yeah.
There is, and I'll probably hit this again when I get to it from the comics. You do find out that Ramona hasn't necessarily been the best person.
Well, who has?
And that a lot of the things that she starts to dislike about Scott, it's actually because she's guilty of it herself. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Of course, with Envy, we do have the third evil ex, which is Todd Ingram, played by Superman himself, Brandon Routh.
Christopher Reeve?
No. The follower. Brandon Routh. In the comics, the character is actually revealed to be a pathological liar. That just about everything he is saying is entirely false. We find out that he is cheating on Envy in the comics with Lynette, who is the drummer of the band Clash at Demon Head. You do see Lynette. Lynette's got a bigger part in the comic. She doesn't really...
She doesn't have a name in the movie.
No, she doesn't. For fans of the comic book, when they're in the green room, you see her standing back there, and you can tell it's her if you know the comics. But she's even the one. She's actually the one that hits the
You hit the highlight out of her hair.
The color out of Knives' hair. It's actually Lynette that does that because she has like a bionic arm, and she extends it out and hits her and all that. So it's not Todd. It's Lynette in the comic. And like I said, you got that little bit there. The thing about Todd being vegan, and when it's revealed that he ate gelato and he didn't know gelato wasn't vegan, in the comics, they actually reveal that he did know.
part of me wonders if they weren't trying to hint at that a little bit when, what's the next thing? And then you ate such and such.
Like chicken parmesan, I think it was.
Chicken parmesan.
Yeah.
Chicken parmesan's not vegan?
Which again, in the comic, it makes it fully clear that he's aware he's eating non-vegan stuff. But of course, they play up that he was dating Envy, and then he left to go off to Vegan Academy and get his superpowers and all that. And he comes back. And of course, the ending of their fight, first off, the base battle. Let's get into the base battle. So the base battle does occur in the comics, but not until after 2 other fights. They actually fight 3 times.
Oh, gosh.
In the comic book. So there's actually the first fight that happens in the green room. That's the one where Scott really kind of goes to attack, and then Todd reveals the vegan powers and just throws Scott around, and Scott realizes there's no way he can beat him. Then later they meet up again, and it's at this kind of Trader Joe's, Aldi type store where they just have a bunch of everything, groceries, and I guess you could say like a super Walmart type issue, but smaller. And they fight there to the point where, if I'm remembering it right, the grocery store is like implodes on itself. Yeah. And then of course they finally get into the base battle, which in the comics, Scott is actually aided in the base battle by Crash and the Boys. Mm-hmm. Which, if you remember, is the band they go up against at the very beginning.
Oh, that's
at the
funny.
Battle of the Bands. And by this time in the comic books, they've actually had where the boys have overpowered Crash, and so the band is now called The Boys and Crash. But they actually aid Scott in the battle. It doesn't work out. Todd is able to overpower them. And in the comics, Scott... Again, it's very meta. Scott says a line along the way of, there's no way of beating you unless something happens out of convenience right about now. Mm-hmm. And that's when the vegan police show up. And all that's the same.
So does he trick him into drinking the half and half?
No, because like I said, in the comic, they do the whole thing where the vegan police show up and just know that he's been cheating. So it's not the I did like that more in the movie though. The fact that he kind of tricks him. That it's the brains over brawn.
Well, because that means that he actually defeats him.
Yes.
As opposed to just he gets defeated out of, like you said, some deus ex machina.
True.
Ex machina.
Yeah, which is actually the words he uses in the comic book. But he still does the headbutt once Todd loses his powers. Okay. There is still the headbutt. He does that in the comic.
Headbutted my boyfriend to death.
The difference here, though, is that this is actually in the comic where Scott earns the extra life.
Okay.
Whereas it happens at a different moment in the movie. This is actually where it happens in the comic. They kind of do... I didn't mention this earlier. When he defeats Lucas Lee in the comic, he actually earns a skateboard... But he can't use it because, as his character says, that he turned down that proficiency when he was in school. So they, again, playing off that video game kind of aspect and whatnot. Moving on to Volume 4, to try to move this thing along, is Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together.
Good for him.
And this is where we get a story about a character that doesn't appear in the movie at all. We get a whole storyline about Scott's old high school crush named Lisa Miller.
Interesting.
And we also get a whole side story about Knives' dad, who is like this ninja trying to kill Scott.
Good for him.
Yeah. Also, we get this volume also gives us Babam is recording an album, so they actually are doing that instead of in the movie. They later signed with Gideon. In the comic, they're just doing it independently. They're recording their own album. They start all of that. Wallace and Scott are actually evicted from their apartment.
Oh, bummer.
In this one. So there's a lot that happens. Of course, we do get the battle with Roxy. And Roxy in the movie, played by Mae Whitman.
Yay! also love Mae Whitman.
It is funny, Mae Whitman and Michael Cera having that...
They're in a lot of stuff together.
Having that connection from Arrested Development and I guess other things. You're saying they have other things.
Yeah, I want to say there was something they even did before Arrested Development together that... or maybe it was that I saw this before I saw Arrested Development.
But the whole thing with that fight, the part of Ramona using Scott as a weapon, it's not in the comics. Again, that is, though, in the one-off that they released for Free Comic Day, where Ramona uses Scott as a weapon. I like that, though, in the movie. I like the fact of him saying, I'm not going to hit a girl, but he's the one who has to do the fighting for it to count. Mm-hmm. And so I liked it. I thought the choreography was really great in it, the way that they were able to do it. Roxy is a little different. She doesn't fight with I guess it was supposed to be her belt or whatnot that she fights with in the movie. She fights with something different. This is actually in the comic book. It is actually in this volume that Scott earns the sword for the power of love that he pulls out of his chest.
Interesting.
This is actually, he earns that to fight Roxy.
Okay, but in the movie, he'd only spent like 5 minutes with Ramona at this point, so already loving her would be awkward. At least in the movie, when he gets the love sword, he'd spent a whole 10 minutes with her at that point.
Yeah, and here's the thing. So he gets the sword to fight Roxy, and again, he fights Roxy. Of course, in the movie, we got the thing that he did with Envy in the comic, with the touching of the back of the knee, and that's what defeats Roxy.
Is this going to make me cringe?
In the comic, he slices Roxy into pieces.
Pieces?
I think 3 pieces. He slices her maybe just in half, but they do they both leap into the air, and then you get the flash, and then when they both land, you realize Scott got the hit, and she just falls into pieces.
Gross.
Yeah. And in then randomly, whereas all these other X's have exploded into coins, Roxy explodes into woodland creatures.
Well, you lesbians.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Little bunnies and squirrels and birds and all that.
So everyone can feel real bad about killing poor Mae Whitman. What has she ever done to anyone?
Well, again, not Mae Whitman. This is just Roxy from the comics. So Volume 5, Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe. This is where we get a little bit deeper into Scott's relationship with Ramona, as well as his relationship with Kim. We also learn more about what's going on in Ramona's head. There's this running thing throughout the comics where Ramona's head is glowing. They show little things around her head. That at times, which you later find out is where Gideon is controlling her. Oh. Which, they reveal in the movie by the little chip on the back of her head. So they reveal that in Volume 5. And they get into a lot more of Ramona and Kim kind of having a relationship as just being friends.
That's nice.
Yeah. I don't know why again, because they play Kim as just this mean, bitter
weirdo.
Yeah, and she's definitely a lot more. There's a lot more substance to her.
And you know what? It's one thing to portray her that way, but then they even go that extra inch, and I'm saying inch. It's no mile. That extra inch to say well, why is Kim like that? Oh, well, we dated. She's saying, so, you didn't end things badly, to imply that she's like that because of the way Scott treated her. Yeah. And then...
in a way, yes. Again, it's not...
But I'm not saying that's not what happened.
Yeah.
I'm saying comic, that in the movie that's what they imply.
Yeah, in the comic, it is more of it was a mutual thing.
And that's fine. People
which is
break
how they
up.
still remain friends.
Yeah. But they're not friends in this. She hates him. Yeah. And it's implied that she is... the way she is because of whatever it is Scott did to her. And she never even softens a little bit until he tells her he's sorry. And that's just doing her dirty. Like, didn't give her any sort of autonomy. She is basically who she is because of Scott, and she can't move on with her life until Scott affords her an apology.
Yeah. Now, I do think Kim is a much deeper, better character. And I'll get to that a little bit in a minute. So the Evil X's, of course, this one, they combine two of them because they are brothers.
Are they twins?
Kyle and Ken, I think they are supposed to be twins in the comic. I can't remember 100%. Kyle and Ken Katayanagi, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce their last name. They are played by real-life brothers, Shota and Kita. I apologize to either of those actors. Sato, if I mispronounced their names, but they were real-life brothers who played these brothers. Unfortunately, the actors were not very strong in English, which is why they do not speak in the movie. But in the comic, they do a lot of talking.
Yeah, you don't need to know English to be a comic book character. The author just needs to know English.
Yeah.
From what I've gathered.
And these are very different. They are throughout the entire volume. Kind of like with Todd, there's actually multiple battles. Although Scott does not fight them until the end. They actually send out robots to fight Scott.
Interesting.
And so there's moments of Scott battling a robot. One scene, actually, that's happening in the background while Ramona and Kim are having a moment out on this balcony. You see it Scott fighting off this robot in the background between the scenes. And in the comic, the brothers actually kidnap Kim.
Rude.
In order to lure Scott into a fight.
Feminist icon Kim?
Yeah, so they bring Kim into their hideout or whatnot. Scott follows suit. Scott realizes there's no way he can beat them. And Kim actually does this thing where she says she's getting a text from Ramona, which you find out is a lie because her phone's not working. Mm-hmm. And she tells Scott she's got this text from Ramona and that Ramona knows that Scott can beat them, and that gives Scott the energy and the power to then defeat both of the brothers. And so again, that shows that just much deeper connection that Kim has with Scott, and how he wants she wants Scott and Ramona to end up together.
Which would make sense. Like, just make it 30 minutes longer and justice for Kim.
The Kim cut. You want the Kim cut.
I want the Kim cut. I don't want any of the Scott Pilgrim nonsense. I want Kim has a nice day while Scott Pilgrim faces the world.
Then after the battle in the comics, Scott runs back to Ramona. He runs into the room and Ramona literally disappears.
Interesting.
Like she fades away, vanishes right there in front of Scott's eyes. So they don't do the thing where Gideon kidnaps her, or not necessarily kidnaps her, but where she ends up back with Gideon. They make her just disappear. Now, of course, Scott does think that it's Gideon, and this goes straight into Volume 6, which is called Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour. Ramona has disappeared. In the book, Sex Bomb disbands.
Okay.
So they are not the band that performs at the Chaos Theater. It is actually Envy that performs at the Chaos Theater. In fact, Envy is the one that ends up with Gideon.
Oh.
And so they go that route. So it's not Ramona that goes back to Gideon. Envy's the one that ends up with Gideon.
Justice for Envy.
Yeah, and so, like I said, this is where things get really different because the film had actually already been written before the comic book was released, right. And while O'Malley, I think, used elements from it. So there's a lot of difference here. The shot of Gideon on like the pyramid with Ramona on the leash.
Gross.
That was actually something that Scott encounters when he goes into subspace in the comic. You know, that thing that you see every now and then in the movie, like when they're in the desert or when they go through the door and they are floating. Mm-hmm. That's subspace, which is this whole bigger thing in the comics where Ramona has the ability to travel through subspace. But Scott goes into subspace. He actually encounters this evil version of Gideon there with Ramona. Then that's how he frees Ramona. Let's get into Gideon. We've talked about all of the villains. Let's get into Gideon. That's hard to say. Played by Jason Schwartzman, who I didn't bother to look up his age because I know he had to have been the oldest of the actors.
I thought we did look up his age because it made me mad. That I swear we looked up his age. Continue. This is the part of the show where Bethany Googles. So
they do their battle. There are a lot of similarities. He does get stabbed, or Scott does get stabbed by Gideon. That is a lot more gruesome, kind of like with the Roxy death. Mm-hmm. A lot of blood, and all that.
When did this movie come out?
2010.
So he was 30.
So he was the same age as, I forgot who else we said was 30.
The guitarist.
Yeah. We do get that, although they don't do the whole that Scott repeats the day.
Right.
Or the event. When he decides to use his extra life, he just gets up from where he was in the comic, and then goes on from there. I kind of like, you've been talking about it a little bit, I kind of like, though, in the movie, how he goes back, and when he enters this time, he makes his peace with the band, and
I do, too.
Yeah.
I will say that. Like, it's the one point in the movie where it shows him recognizing, because it's the moment he apologizes to Kim, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
And so then she is on his side.
It's what he does in the comic, so
I'm pretty sure this is the moment he apologizes to Kim. He apologizes to all of them. He just takes a step back, and it's the one moment of the movie where he shows some sort of growth.
Yeah. Now, and the way it happens in the comic is actually when he fights Nega Scott. And he actually fights Nega Scott in the comic.
That's funny, but that little bit at the end where he doesn't actually fight him is hysterical.
Well, and the thing is that if you think about it, and this is going into the movie, when they come out, when he and Nega Scott are walking out and they're talking about, meeting up again and whatnot, and he goes, he's actually a really nice guy. Well, wait a minute.
So that means that you're the jerk.
He's Nega Scott. He's supposed to be the opposite of what you are. So yeah, that does kind of play off of, so the real Scott is a jerk, is not the nice guy.
It's what I've been saying this whole time, everybody.
Yeah. But back to Gideon, because I really want to hit this.
Okay.
So want to hit, and I remember telling you this when we were talking about it while getting ready for the show. In the book, Gideon reveals his whole master plan, and that is to have his own, like, harem. I don't know what his thing was, but they reveal that he has his 6 former ex-girlfriends frozen in these pods.
Monster!
And he's wanting to add Ramona to that collection.
You didn't tell me this? This is awful.
I really thought I showed you. So yeah, I don't know what his intention was.
We all know what his intention was, Laramy.
Yeah, again, I'm definitely glad they left that out of the movie. Of course, in the comic, when they defeat Gideon, they do release all of these 6 girls. There's even a funny scene where one of them is talking on the phone, going, "Sorry, Mom, I haven't called. I've been frozen for like the last 6 months," or whatever it was that she says.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, but in the comic, when going back to Nega Scott.
Hold on, no,
yeah,
we can't just move past this, Laramy. So you're telling me that these 6 women were frozen because their man could not save them, And they could not get unfrozen until another man saved them. Is this what you're telling me?
I mean, truthfully, yes, because they were frozen.
Y'all, this movie, no. No, y'all, it was only 11 years ago. No. Do better. Do better, everybody. Do better.
But yeah, again, I get very much glad that, I don't know what O'Malley's idea was. I don't know if maybe...
We know what his idea was.
Anyway.
Well, okay, but real talk. A lot of times, in order to make a man seem more villainous, a woman has to get brutalized. You see that in a lot of movies. It's a shorthand, like, in order for a woman to be, have a tragic backstory, she gets raped, she gets kidnapped. Typically, a woman gets brutalized in a story in order to prove a point. For typically a man. And it's a shorthand, really crappy trope in a lot of stories.
Yeah, but this is where we get into one of the big differences. So we'll go ahead and get into this. In the comic book, knives does not help out in the fight. That happens in the movie.
Okay.
The reason it happens in the movie is because the original plan of the movie was for Scott to end up with knives at the end.
Also gross.
Which, again, goes back to, well, she's 18 by the end, at least in the comic. I do think that's one of the reasons why they have Ramona's character so cold in the movie, is because the whole plan was for you not to want them to end up together.
And I also kind of think that's why they were really wishy-washy about whether or not it was weird that Scott was dating a high school girl. But, in the comic, she's 18. But we've already discussed, in the movie, it's been a week. Yeah. She's still in high school.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would have liked him to end up with knives at the end. This is where I'm really torn, because the comic is so much more in depth and goes so much more into the story. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ramona's killed in the comic during their battle.
Permanently?
No. Okay. That's where, when I mentioned about how Scott has to go into subspace, like, that's how he brings her back. And so there's just a lot more to it. Although I will say, for that last volume, O'Malley gets really convoluted in the...
That's when he gets convoluted?
Yeah. No, it honestly is. Like, he tries to explain that not only has Gideon been controlling Ramona, but you also find out that Gideon's also been controlling Scott. Which is, remember how I mentioned earlier how they kind of explain why Scott is always forgetting things, mm-hmm. and why Scott always, seems like he's completely absent-minded? It's because Gideon is going in messing with his memories.
Huh. Okay.
Which, again, it falls apart, honestly. So I'm good with the way the movie handled it. Although, again, I wish Ramona was a little bit more likable in the movie.
Not just likable, but had more of a personality, more wants. Like, we don't know what she wants. We don't know why she wants to date Scott. What is it about him that is appealing at all? Like, she doesn't want to date him in the first place.
Yeah.
She tells him no.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in that, 5-second conversation, she changes her mind and nobody knows why.
Well, and it's like I said, there's a little bit more in the comic. It's revealed, not only do they play on the fact that Scott, both Knives and Ramona, find out that he pretty much cheated on both of them with the other. Mm-hmm. But then Ramona also has to confront the fact that she cheated on one of the exes with another one of the exes. I forgot which one. But, she cheated as well. And so there's that whole thing of Scott has to come to terms with his, which again, they do with the Nega-Scott battle. Mm-hmm. It's the Nega-Scott battle, which Scott is off on this wilderness walk, trying to discover himself.
Good.
And that's where he battles Nega-Scott. and he realizes he's a jerk.
Yeah.
And he realizes, and he has to make amends with Knives and with Envy and with Kim.
Good.
Which you get a little bit in the movie, but they play it a lot more in the comic so that you do realize now he's ready for the relationship with Ramona.
Yeah.
And then Ramona pretty much does the same thing. And then they both, as I've just mentioned, they both die. And they come back as, quote unquote, better people that they can now be together. And that's the way the comic book kind of puts it together. So, but that's the comic, the long 6 volumes as compared with the movie. Kind of, like I said, it's a lengthy comic. It's a great read. Please go out and read it. It's a great read. But that's how it connects kind of to the movie.
Hello, movie viewers and fellow movie lovers. My name is Tim Williams, and I'm the creator and host of Movie Views Presents the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. See, I love the 80s, and I have a great appreciation and nostalgic passion for the classic 80s flicks that birthed my love for movies and ultimately helped shape my childhood. On each episode, I'll discuss, with a special guest co-host of course, a different film from the 1980s. We'll share memories, favorite characters, iconic scenes, and even share some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. We'll discuss famous blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Coming to America, Ghostbusters, Dirty Dancing, Top Gun, Die Hard, and many, many more. As well as some other cult classics and even lesser-known flicks we discovered on cable TV or the now-defunct video rental stores. Remember those? No matter what 80s flick we choose to talk about, we'll always have a good time, so come and check us out. You can find the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast on major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and more. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss a single episode. Once again, I'm Tim Williams, and I hope you'll join me for the next 80s Flick Flashback.
All right, let's get into our final decisions here on Moving Panels. We call it Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It. Go ahead, Bethany. Which one do you pick?
This is tough. It actually is tough. I'm really teetering between Trade It or Stack It.
Okay.
Because honestly, like, if you had asked me a week ago before we had rewatched it, I would have said, at the very least, Stack It. Because it's it is funny. That's the thing, is Michael Cera is funny. A lot of the actors in this movie are funny. Aubrey Plaza is hilarious. It doesn't hold up, Laramy.
Yeah, no, you go back to the one shot last week when I revealed Scott Pilgrim, you could tell you were very excited. But then as we watched it,
I'm just sitting there and it was literally just like, oh no. Oh no. So with a heavy heart, I'm going to trade it. Okay. Because there are other movies that are funny. Although not quite as uniquely filmed, which I will give it that. Like, it's a really cool watch. Like, if you didn't have to listen to the things they're saying, because they say some pretty dumb crap. If you didn't have to listen to them or see Scott Pilgrim at all, a lot of the, like, fight scenes and just the correlation between the movie and how it's part graphic novel and part video game and comedy and all of that, that's beautiful. It's actually really cool. Oh, but it's so bad, you guys. So I'm gonna trade it.
So with that being said, if you could go back,
okay, and
repick one of the movies we discussed last week,
Ant-Man,
you would trade it for Ant-Man?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I
may regret it later. Don't at me.
I am going to say Stack It. I will say Stack It. I do think it's extremely well made. In terms of a movie based off of a comic, it is very true to the source material, although it does carry away, and that's where it loses it for me, because it feels like it just starts to go too fast once it hits that 45 minute or 45 minute mark.
It's almost like they were prepared to make a 2.5 hour long movie, and then they were told halfway through, I'm gonna need you to cut this in half.
Well, with the way streaming services like Netflix and Hulu and some of the, like HBO and all that are doing now, I almost, as much as I hate doing remakes and reboots, I would almost like to see them do this again as a miniseries.
Justice for Kim.
Where they actually do treat the comics as separate.
Right.
And they do each story separately. I would like to see that. Now, if they want to just do it animated, do it animated. I think that would be cool.
I think that would be really cool.
And, stick with the look of the graphic novels and all. I think that would be great. Again, this is one where honestly I enjoyed the comic because of that so much more. I enjoy the movie. It's not a movie that I am going to just want to watch over and over again. I don't think it ever has been, which is why
it's been 10 years since we last watched it.
Well,
probably.
And that's what I'm saying. Why, when I brought it up in the one shot last week, it caught you off guard, because it's not a movie you just think about.
Not a movie that we think about.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other people that watch it.
I'm sure there are. So, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if I would have traded it. I enjoyed just the experience of getting to watch it with you. So
because of how disgusted I got at certain
Well, again,
points.
it might be because we are a married couple who's been married for, a decade. And so, and, together for a little longer than that. And so I think just the fact that knowing you, and as we're watching it, realizing, okay, this isn't the movie that she remembered, and this is now how she's taking it. I enjoyed it.
I said it was with a heavy heart. But you guys, I agree with you. I would love to see Netflix turn it into a series where they could actually take the time. I mean, like I said, I'm not out of my mind. I know you can't make a movie 7 hours long in order to do justice to every single character. It's just, to me, it seemed like this movie took great pains to make sure none of the female characters got any justice.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with you on that. But, so, as far as a Valentine's Day movie goes, although it is the one we picked, this probably isn't the best option. So, hopefully you did decide...
We'll try again next year.
Hopefully you did decide to go with something
like
a little...
Ant-Man.
A little better.
Or Wonder Woman. Or literally anything else. Not literally anything else, but many other things.
But we hope you had a good Valentine's, and you at least enjoyed the fun that this couple of Valentines had together.
Aww.
And so, thank you, Bethany, for joining me.
Thank you, Laramy, for having me.
And being my Valentine.
Thank you, Schmaramy Bells.
Okay. All right, for Moving Panels, on behalf of Bethany, I am Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page. But yeah, you might say they're the ones who got away. They're cryogenically frozen, awaiting for the future day when they'll all go out with me. And it's got the six X's and the empty pod.
I love them. Laramy, no.
Yeah.
So how does Knives' story end? Does she just, realize she has better things to do with her life?
Pretty much.
I'm the host of the podcast This Morning Show. Every week, me and one of my two co-hosts, either my mom or my brother, will discuss a movie, new or old. Most of our movies are from Disney Plus and HBO Max and go from a wide variety of different movies. We do movies such as Toy Story and Home Alone, and we also do continuing series as The Mandalorian and Star Trek Discovery.